Hello, and welcome to Creative Banter, a creativity and philosophy-focused podcast where anything goes. I'm your host, Cody Schultz. Joining me is the one and only Ben Horn. I recently made my way down to Washington, D.C. for the first time in a few years to see an exhibition of Robert Adams photography. Adams is a wonderfully inspiring photographer whose work is unlike most I look at anymore. In other words, he isn't solely focused on nature. This got me thinking quite a bit about my own work, both in terms of print sizes, like usual, and subject matter. After a bit of a rough transition, we talk about a breathing technique Ben has learned of, which he has been toying with recently, and believes it could help with the higher elevation hikes he does on many of his backpacking trips. Finally, we talk a bit about a concept known as unlocking the commons. Let's dive right into it, shall we? Cool, we're good. So, this past Saturday, I went down to Washington, D.C. for the first time. Well, no, not for the first time. I've been there before.
Yeah.
It's recording early is not my thing. Anyway, went down to Washington, D.C., and I wanted to see the Robert Adams exhibition, American Silence. And initially, I wanted to meet up with Jeffrey Sidoris, who runs the Deep Natter podcast. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it, but nonetheless, my girlfriend and I, we made a day out of it. I ended up walking about 9 miles throughout the day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was exhausting.
That's a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
And how long of a drive was that from where you live?
about 3 hours.
Oh, wow. So you got 3 hours and then you got 9 miles of walking.
And then
That's
3
a
hours
lot.
again. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a long day. I mean, it was nice. We left the house around 7, got down there around like 10-ish. Luckily, we were able to find a parking spot right outside of the gallery, which was on the street, but it was very lucky there. Because that way I just had to pay for the whatever little meter app thing they use now, and it ended up being like $15 for the parking for both spots. So for the full day, it was $15 to park, which was a lot cheaper than the $15 for 2 hours that it would have been at a parking garage or something. So
Yeah. Plus ultra convenient being just, right there.
yeah, we were pretty much centralized with where we wanted to be. So
Nice.
So we went to this gallery, and it was about a 7 or 8 room gallery of Robert Adams' work through the years. That's all taken from a big book that he had done titled American Silence. All black and white work, and it kind of follows his journey as a photographer through the years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really just, what I found most interesting about it was the size choices for the prints, because
How so?
a lot of them weren't like these big prints. Like you look online, like on Instagram or whatever, and you're seeing all of these guys now that are doing these big 40 by 50, 48 by 60, like fine art acrylic pieces, like acrylic face mounts.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that.
And first of all, I'm thinking, and I think we've talked about this before, how can you even fit that in your house? Because I have one wall.
Yes.
I have one wall where I'm in my little like area here where I could actually fit something like that's that big. And even then, I'm like, I don't even want to put something that big because I'd much rather have a couple small pieces there. But
Yeah, it'll just dominate the room.
exactly. So it was interesting to see that all of these prints were silver gelatins, and the majority of them were like 8 by 10. There were a couple 11 by 14s, a couple 16 by 20s, but most of them were right around that 8 by 10 mark, which looked really good. I mean, you had
Yeah.
a nice maybe 15, 20 prints in each room, maybe a little bit more, but each one you could go up to and you could stand close to and see the detailing in it, and then you could back away and take it in as a whole. And it just, the whole viewing experience was so drastically different than what you would get with doing such giant 40 by 50 plus prints.
Yeah. Now, were they framed and matted and all that?
Yeah, they were. They were all, for the
Okay.
most part, typical like black wood frame with a white mat, that kind of thing.
Now, the way that you describe that, and especially in comparison to, having these large, overbearing and kind of imposing, huge prints, but with the smaller prints, to me, that sounds like a similar experience to sort of the intimacy of viewing images in a book,
Yeah,
but in a very controlled setting where it's almost like this book is laid out in front of you over the walls of a room, and you can quietly take it in that gallery environment, which is sounds like it's a far more intimate viewing experience than having these large imposing prints.
yeah. I mean, the nice thing too was because you could take the whole thing in just by taking like 2, 3 steps away from it,
Mm-hmm.
you were able to fill that room with more pieces because you got to figure these rooms weren't huge by any means. So if you try to put even a bunch of 16 by 20s in there, and like I said, there were a few here and there in the bigger rooms, but the viewing distance there changes drastically because now you have a big piece and you have to take even further steps back to take it in as a whole. Otherwise, you have to constantly be moving your eye or moving your head to take it all in.
Yeah.
So the whole experience just, it's really interesting to see how much it truly changes depending on the size of the artwork, which got me thinking into my own printing and my own uh, offerings for print size because, as we've talked about before, I love those small 8 by 10, 11 by 14 sizes.
Mm-hmm.
Simply for that reason that you have a lot of my work is more intimate in the intimate woodlands, and so to have a more close up, tight knit viewing experience, I think works a lot better than if they were these giant mural sized prints.
Yeah. And also I can see how in the context of, a gallery showing of a bunch of these small images, just by the sheer fact that you have so many more that you can have, like, on a wall, not that you're going to pack a wall full of them, but since you have so many more you can have there, it's more about the context of those images in relation to each other in the same way that it would be, if a person were displaying smaller prints in their house. You can, just as you're saying, you can have several prints in a space that otherwise one large print would be. And so you have that sort of context that arises because of that. And there is something very, I think that's something that is lost a little bit with people wanting to produce very large, overbearing prints, as opposed to the more intimate experience of viewing a small print that's really nicely framed, nicely presented, in the quiet sort of appeal and how it would just it changes the viewing experience so much.
Yeah, and like you were saying too, looking at each individual image, at least to me, there weren't a ton that would blow your socks off, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the rooms were organized so that you would start at one piece and you would get around, because from my understanding, the book is laid out in individual sections, because he had done quite a few coffee table books in the past. And this is just kind of like an amalgamation of all of those. And so each room is almost like a different book that he had done. And it's laid out so that you start with one piece at the beginning, and by the time that you get around the room, you've seen that, essentially that whole book. And so that each room connects to the next. But each image as well, yeah, there might only be 3 or 4 that are really strong images,
Mm-hmm.
but seeing all of them together just drastically changes the experience too.
That's very cool. Now, I'm not familiar with his work. How would you describe his work?
You're familiar with Chuck Kimmerly?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm very uneducated when it comes to photography.
I'm starting to realize that here, Ben.
Yeah, which is all the more reason to have a podcast, because that way I can just hear about all the sort of interesting stuff, you know.
Okay. Well, when I saw Robert Adams' work, it reminded me of Chuck Kimmerly's. And both of them kind of do... okay, there's a quote here from Robert Adams that I have pulled up that pretty much summarizes both these artists' work pretty well. He says, "I think if you placed me almost anywhere and gave me a camera, you could return the next day to find me photographing. It helps me, more than anything I know, to find home." So he's not a single genre photographer. He's kind of like the stereotypical black and white photographer, whereas photograph anything that catches your eye. So a lot of his work goes from, he had done a series of photographs on, I think when he was living in Oregon, on this just decimated forest that was being like taken down and just destroyed. But then he goes and he does photographs of this little town that he had lived in or been familiar with, and the people there within. And then he changes it to doing photographs at night of these like gas stations and these little buildings that catch his eye at night.
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes back into doing photographs of like the beach and these giant tree burrs that were left over from just wherever. So he's nothing like how like Simon Baxter is, whereas he's strictly woodland. He's kind of just all over the place, which is something else that got me thinking about my own photography, because my interests, yes, are primarily in nature and in the woodlands, but like this whole Coke machine project that I've been talking about has also been opening up doors, and I have interest in like the abandoned buildings in the area, and then also like the farmland in the area too, because Robert Adams did a lot with the farmland too. And so it's just made me think a lot more about the direction I want to take my own photography to, which is always interesting to debate.
Yeah. So it sounds like based on what you said there, it's almost as though it's exploring with the camera and almost like seeing things for the first time, perhaps in a different environment with the camera, as opposed to like, I'll go to an area that's very familiar and return to that area over and over again and keep kind of working that area. It sounds like he's more the type to, you know, whatever he sees, you know, he wants to document it, even though maybe perhaps especially if he's not necessarily familiar with it. But I can see how the photos would be could have a very interesting ability to show, you know, his viewpoint of something that he's witnessing for the first time, perhaps, or, you know, to show something as he sees it, which is a really interesting approach to things. And it sounds like that's I can see how that would work really well for your work also. Just, you know, being inspired to kind of go in these different directions with it, which I think is also something very conducive for black and white, since you can, find so much interesting subject matter in black and white where color may not be quite as conducive for that.
Right. Nick Carver. A black and white version of Nick Carver. There you go.
I could see that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
At least you know who Nick is. So
yes, I do. if they're within the YouTube circle,
yeah,
the genre of le YouTube, then yes, I will be familiar with that reference.
Okay, well there you go.
Nice.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, overall is a really nice experience. Not only seeing that exhibition, but the whole day, just all together. I mean, it was a lot of walking.
Yeah.
Like I said, 9 miles was, yeah, that was rough on your feet. And it didn't help too, because in the morning it was real cool, like 60s, mid 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were in jeans and a t-shirt or whatever. And then like midday it shoots up to like 84. I'm like, okay, in and out of buildings it is. just to cool down some. But yeah, it was I'm looking forward to going down there again at some point. Just the drive as a whole, but all the galleries, all the museums down there are free to enter. So that makes it overall a very nice, cheap trip. So
yeah.
Well,
that's good. So speaking of the arts, it's kind of a rough transition, but I'm going to make it work here. I started reading a new book recently, and it's not specifically a photography book, but I found it to be very fascinating. And this came about when I was on my trip up to the White Mountains, and when I was up in an area waiting to take a photo, I actually had a full cell signal there, so I had posted some pictures and stuff like that. And I got a message from Bree Stockwell, which I know you're familiar with her work,
right?
And she had sent me a link to this video having to do with breathing, and it was very interesting. And she had sent that to me because I'm up at high elevation and all that sort of stuff. And I didn't really have an opportunity to watch the video in the field just because my cell signal was still a little sketchy for video. But when I got home, I watched the video, and it was a fascinating look at sort of kind of like a biohacking your body, kind of like doing like a body hack to make you more efficient at taking in oxygen and kind of learning about how the whole process works. And so the core of it was that people are essentially breathing wrong. Breathing through the mouth is not ideal. Breathing through the nose is far more ideal for a variety of different reasons. And so just as a little bit of an experiment, when I was skating the past few times, I was only breathing through my nose. I wasn't doing any breathing through my mouth at all. And it was a fascinating experience because at first you feel like you're drowning. But then after a while, you settle into a rhythm, and then you're able to still perform just about as well as before, but it gives an overall calm feeling. It was a bit like a cross between meditation and a rather intense cardio exercise. And so when I had mentioned I had been skating that way, someone had recommended me a book, and the book is called Breath by James Nestor. I'm working my way through it right now, but it's a really fascinating look on how so many of other cultures around the world, especially dating back quite a while, have so much more insight on something as simple as breathing that now in our modern world, we just kind of assume we know everything, and to realize that we don't, and that there's so much that we're missing out on. So if anyone is looking to kind of open their eyes a little bit to kind of learn some other stuff. There's some techniques that are listed in there. It talks about how like free divers are able to, you know, swim down 300 feet and then, on a single breath of air and all that sort of stuff. But it's been an absolutely fascinating take. But that sense of calm, along with the exercise, was really, really interesting. So I don't know, what are your experiences? I don't know, you had mentioned going to the gym. Have you ever tried only breathing through your nose?
I guess I'll have to tomorrow.
Yeah, I highly recommend it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd be curious to watch that video. You'll have to send me the link, and I'll include it in the show notes below then too.
Yeah. And
because that's really, yeah, the whole idea that, like you were saying, that in a world where we have so much information readily available, that we could be doing something as simple as breathing in a way that, yes, it works, but isn't putting our body to the full potential. That's fascinating.
Yeah, and it was linking stuff like high blood pressure, very high resting heart rates, all kinds of interesting things along those lines. But also the sort of psychological effects of breathing through the nose. And there was a little, almost like a little experiment that I had done in terms of just, breathing out all that I could through my nose versus breathing out all that I could, sort of exhaling completely through my mouth, and then just paying attention to how you feel afterwards versus doing a complete exhale through your nose and then noticing how you feel afterwards. And when I was breathing through my mouth, and if I were to exhale completely, it would lead to like this impending feeling of doom and anxiety versus breathing completely through my nose left me with a sense of calm. And so it has me also thinking, and the reason I'm bringing this up is, when I go on the trips and I get that first day funk, simple things like, making sure that I'm breathing through my nose, and there's all kinds of techniques involved in that. And I'm like wondering if that might also be part of a solution for that, since it is a kind of an all-encompassing thing. So I'm going to keep working my way through that book. And, it's one of those books where I mentioned to my wife, as, she's working, like, hey, you may want to listen to this one on an audiobook, because whenever I find a fascinating book like that, she always enjoys kind of reading it or listening to it for herself, because she does programming stuff, so she can listen to audiobooks while she works.
At any point during that book, have they talked about what happens when you have really bad allergies and can't breathe through your nose?
Yes, that's actually part of it.
I was going to say, because I would love to do this experiment alongside my girlfriend, but
yeah,
the problem is she's allergic to dogs, and both my family and hers have a dog, so her daily ritual is made up of stuffy nose and tissues. So
she is, so far what I've learned from this book, and I'm maybe, I don't know, 15-20% of the way through, that's basically the same position that the author was in when he started doing all this. The core of it is basically, when you breathe through your nose, it makes it even easier to, you use it or lose it kind of thing. The more you don't breathe through your nose, the harder it becomes to breathe through the nose. But the more you breathe through the nose, the better the impact on allergies and congestion. And one of the things that was fascinating was they're talking about how most people that have to, like, whether because of, cancer from smoking and such, where they have to, drill that hole in the throat to breathe through there. Most of those people, like the nose, since it's not being used, it completely kind of closes up. Just because it's just like a kind of an atrophy sort of a thing. And so yeah, that was actually the position that the author was in, not the hole in the throat, but just chronic congestion and all kinds of stuff. So yeah, so far I would say would be a good read, because I found it to be fascinating. So it is pretty cool.
I'll have to add it to my list of over 30 plus books that I have been.
But may want to
very
kick it up
slow.
a little higher up the list, because it's something that can have a pretty big impact. And the other reason I say that is that I've been looking for ways to give myself a further edge when it comes to the skating, since that's something where it's a very noticeable difference. And so by making myself able to make better use of the oxygen, gives a little bit of a athletic boost. So that's my other reasoning for it, is to try to become in even better shape. And it's kind of cool because I can track those stats on the Fitbit and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. I'll have to, like I said, give that video a watch, and then when I finally find the motivation again to get at this list of reading, I will bump it up the list a bit. But yeah. So something else that's been on my mind that's not related to breathing, I don't think at all. The idea of unlocking the commons and the principle of Gesamtkunstwerk, which is German that translates almost literally to total artwork, or but it's frequently translated as total work of art or universal artwork. And it is defined as a work of art that makes use of all or many art forms, or strives to do so. But more importantly, it connects to this principle of unlocking the commons, where you have kind of like the Patreon, where you have people that are actually, I'd say it's almost exactly like what we're doing with the Patreon with this podcast, where people are supporting the podcast in order to keep it going as a free for all kind of service or product. And this ties directly into that whole idea that 1,000 True Fans, if you've heard of that.
Yes.
Where you only need 1,000 people to contribute $100 a year in order to make a 6-figure salary, and you would then be able to afford that Ghibellini 8x10 we were talking about in a previous episode.
Yes. For which I will smash into the ground in Death Valley.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I am looking forward to the video where you do that.
Yeah.
I think that is a partnership we need to see. How sturdy is this $110,000 Ghibellini 8x10?
Like a top gear of large format photography. But yeah.
Yes. Mr. Beast will fund it. But anyway, so there's a photographer and writer by the name of Craig Maude, and he is he's based primarily in Japan right now, which is a dream of mine. But he has this membership program that he's been running for the past 3 years that he calls Special Projects. And you can support this membership at $10 a month, $100 a year, or $1,500 for a lifetime membership. And really, there aren't many perks to joining. You don't really get much of anything if you join monthly. I mean, you get a members-only newsletter, a members-only office hours podcast.
Do you get a members-only jacket?
No, not with the monthly.
Because those are pretty cool.
But then when you get to the yearly, you get obviously all of the monthly perks, but then you also get a $40 off coupon for his one book they're working on a 4th edition right now, but it's Kisa by Kisa. And then you get $50 off coupon for photographic prints that he sells, and then any future discounts on forthcoming books and prints. And the lifetime really, he says, if you support at the lifetime, you'll surprise the heck out of him. You'll sort of scare him a bit. And then he promises he won't send you an NFT. So
I can live
that alone,
by that.
Yeah, that alone is worth the lifetime membership, that you won't get
I like
an
this
NFT.
guy.
Um, but the other thing that he does too, which is something that I decided to pursue a little bit here, is he offers students, college students, high school students, whatever, a free yearly membership for as long as you're a student. And so, of course, being cheap like I am and wanting to see how he runs this,
Mm-hmm.
I sent him an email. I'm like, hey, I'm a student. Can I have a membership? Because I have a lot of questions about this, and I didn't want to send him an email and bombard him with a bunch of questions about how he runs this and all of this. If I
Yeah.
could try and slowly figure it out myself through
Just kind of see it
being a
firsthand.
membership. Right.
Yeah.
So I got the membership, and like I said, he does not really, there's really no incentive to being a member. Like, he runs these bi-monthly or so, what he calls boring live streams, which are essentially just like little board meetings, where he has anyone who's a member who can join on a Zoom call and just talk to him, give him suggestions. You can learn more about what he's doing at that time, and just his whole thing is that a lot of the people that are supporting him, especially on the yearly or lifetime member, they're smarter than him. They're these big business gurus or people that just enjoy his work and want to see his work prosper, but can also help him a lot too.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like an even trade-off of like, you benefit a bit, I benefit a bit. The other thing that he said too was the fact that he doesn't want, and he tries really hard to prevent this, he doesn't want anyone to feel as though they're going to be getting something more. Like, he's going to start creating more content specifically for members.
Yeah.
Because from what I was reading, he was running into the same issue that I'm running into now when it comes to pitching articles and such for publications. Is you're getting denied a lot, you're getting a lot of rejection letters, and it's really difficult to get paid to write the kind of articles that he wants to write, that I want to write, that kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so he just created this membership platform, and he is now up to, I think he said somewhere around 1,500 members after about 3 years of doing this.
Oh, wow.
So he's making quite a bit of money off of this, more than enough to be living in Japan, but it's also nice because all of that money goes into funding the projects that he wants to see be done. So working with certain publishers and such over in Japan that he's built up this really great relationship with, and making these real high quality photography and writing related books.
That's fascinating.
All of this as a whole has just gotten me really thinking how I can implement something similar.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not going to be tomorrow I already have 1,000 true fans kind of deal, but
Yeah, it's something that takes time for certain.
right. And so this all relates back to this podcast, because right now we have found ourselves running into a brick wall when it comes to Patreon. Patreon is great for getting monetary support from you that are listening, but we've found that it's very difficult as well for certain people to actively comment on the discussion threads and such. And so now we are
it's kind
faced.
of weird the way that it works.
Yeah, I mean, these are supposed to be public posts where anyone can comment, but we've gotten varying responses from Patreon about how they truly work, and whether someone who has an account but isn't supporting us can comment, and it's a whole mess. Regardless of that, we are going to be putting up a Discord, which at this point will be linked down below. It's a work in progress, so keep that in mind. I have never worked with Discord before. I don't think you have, Ben.
No, I haven't.
I mean, I've been on a couple servers, and I've been trying to look at these servers a little bit more closely to figure out how everything is run, which seems pretty simple. Nonetheless, that's the solution for now.
Yeah.
But when it comes to unlocking the commons for as a whole, it's a really annoying workaround. Because now you have
Yeah.
Patreon, now you have Discord. There's no one home for everything, which
Yeah.
becomes really just not only a pain for myself to try and set up, but also a pain for viewers because now they're jostling around depending on what they want to bear witness to.
Yeah. And the weird part with Patreon is it was fairly inconsistent. So for example, I was able to go on and reply to some of the comments with my own personal account, and my own personal account is not signed up as a patron to the podcast, but I was able to do that. And I know several other people were able to comment without specifically supporting a tier, but other people weren't able to. So it's not as though we could figure out, here are the steps you got to do. You have to do this, click this box, do this, and then you can comment. It was just kind of like, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, kind of like not quite sure what's going on. And so it would be nice to have one place that basically does everything that we need, but that's proven to be difficult, which is why what you're mentioning, that system is definitely very fascinating, and it's the way that that you describe that he has it set up. To me, it seems a bit like kind of like a modern version of commissioning work, over a large group as opposed to just one individual, commissioning the work. But to be able to produce what you feel is a uncompromised work that is more genuine, and to be able to put the time and the effort and the expense into it is something that is very desirable. I've been able to touch on a little bit of that with my own work, but certainly not to the level that he has.
Yeah. Like I said, I mean, I still have a lot of questions for him, and at some point, I'm going to have to just condense them down into 3 to 5 or so and just send off an email and just hope that he has some insight that he's willing to share that I can kind of take what I need from it. Because right now, my biggest gripe is with Squarespace for doing this on a personal basis, because they have the members area, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm going to set it up, I want to have the ability of people having that lifetime membership if they want it. Well, in order to do that, it's a huge workaround. You can have the monthly and the yearly. That's pretty basic. But you try to add any other like payment tier to that, and you have to create a whole new members area.
Oh,
which just increases the pricing too, because at the very basic pricing of, I think maybe $9 a month or something like that,
mm-hmm.
you get one members area. Well, then it jumps up to like $12 a month or something for 2 members area, and then jumps up again for 3 plus or whatever. So it just becomes one of those very annoying paywalls that you have to get around. And so I would like to get away from Patreon, because I want everything to be as condensed into one spot as possible, into my own website, so people don't have to leave my website. And the reality with this too is I really only need to have a single page for these member areas, because there really isn't going to be much that you get by signing up besides helping to support me to write the articles that you as a viewer enjoy, but also that I enjoy writing, along with creating the work that goes both ways as well, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, what if when you reach out to Craig Mod, if you ask him these questions and he just has one simple response, which is, are you breathing through your nose? That's all you have to do. Just breathe through your nose. all the tiers take care of themselves at that point. It just log onto your website. It's there. It's automatically laid out in front of you. That's the secret.
I would. I don't know what I would do.
I'd breathe through my nose.
Well, yeah, that immediately I would
Yeah.
be breathing through my nose, but no,
That-
it's
that-
just
yeah.
it's all gotten me thinking about what I want to do in terms of my own website and like the layout of it. If I wish I was smart enough to be able to make my own website, like through WordPress or through some real basic, like I think he uses, I think it's Hugo that he uses or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
which is just like a static site generator that's open source. But I know nothing really about coding,
Yeah.
and that makes it really difficult to try and make a website exactly how I would like it made.
And also this is something that we've talked about a little bit in the past. It was in the context of, I believe, I think it had to do with how I started doing the YouTube stuff and everything else kind of came into being, and how if I was, starting from scratch now, things would be a lot more difficult. But along the same lines, thinking about, many years in the future, it's tough to know what the landscape will look like in terms of being able to generate an income from doing what you love. And within that context, the fact that whatever, mechanisms by which, Craig is using, those it's a sort of thing where maybe stuff along those lines will be more readily available, 5 years down the line or something. We don't really know where things are going, but at some point that will become even more feasible, where it sounds like he kind of put together something on his own for the most part.
I mean, his is just made up of, he has this website that's built with Hugo, and then he uses Memberful, which is owned by Patreon. The father company owns both, but there's no easy way to integrate Memberful into Squarespace because Squarespace wants you to use their member areas program, which obviously. But the other thing that I thought was interesting with him was, now that he's past that 1,000 true fans level, he's starting to think about when he's going to cap membership.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which is, yeah, it's a fascinating idea of thinking at what point is it going to be too many members to bolster, because you can get to a point where you can think of this like kind of two ways. One, yeah, if I get, for each new member that I get, that's another $100. So if I'm up at 3,000 members, that's $300,000 that I'm making a year, which is amazing for really anyone, let alone any artist.
Yeah, for sure.
But then you have to consider, well, that's 3,000 people that I have to, at least to some degree, keep happy, because that's more people that I have to deal with on an individual basis. That's more that I have to, that might have opinions that they want to share with me, and then email gets flooded. It's also increasing the cost of doing the members only member or newsletters, because now that's a greater monthly cost as well that you're spewing out
Everything
for all this.
It scales up.
Exactly. It gets to be a lot, and that can be overwhelming to have so many people that are truly devoted to you and your work. So that's kind of where his head is at, is at what level do I just say, yeah, you get put on a wait list if you want to join.
And also, it has me thinking about the impact that would have on one's work, because that income isn't necessarily tied to the creation of a specific project. It's something that exists as a baseline to allow him to pursue what he wants to produce what he wants to. But when that income is not tied to something specifically, then I wonder about how that will impact things in the long term. Like if I had a certain amount that was coming, especially a substantial amount, how would that change my own motivations to create new work? I would think just because of human nature, it wouldn't necessarily be it wouldn't be a motivating factor necessarily, because you realize, doing more work doesn't necessarily earn you more. So there's also that fascinating aspect to it. You have to be a very determined person. You have to be a very self-motivated person. And I think you'd have to have your own goals, your own objectives that are not tied to the money, but just things that you really want to do, which it sounds like that's the case for him.
Yeah. And the other thing to keep in mind too is if something happens where you just stop producing work or you just go through a long dry spell, you have to be really confident in the people that are supporting you that they're not going to just drop off like flies because you're no longer producing something.
Yeah.
Like you have to be, and I think that that's helpful with running a members only newsletter too, because, and like these live streams and the board meetings and such that he does, because you can keep a very open line of communication.
That's got to be important.
If something happens where you're going to be away for a month or two, not producing any content, at least from the outset, that's being released, you can be like, hey, here's a heads up on this. It's going to be a bit. But the whole idea is just, it's got me thinking, and it's something I would absolutely love to make happen, but it's just a matter of how.
Yeah. Yeah, I see that being a direction that will gain more popularity in time, especially as the methods of doing that become a little bit easier to sort out from a technical standpoint. But also, I also do wonder about, as more people start doing stuff along those lines, that market will become more saturated. It'll seem less unique. And so it's probably also sort of thing where those who are in first will be the ones that will benefit most from it. And then just like everything else, people just want to, people will see the end result and they won't realize the work that goes into it. They won't realize how long it takes and how it's, an issue of long-term growth versus people want that short-term gain. And though perhaps in the long run, that is the sort of thing that those left standing will be the ones that really are putting that time and that effort into it. I hope you enjoyed our creative banter. You can learn more about Cody's work by visiting his website, codyschultz.com. And you can find my work at benhorn.com. For further discussion, join us at patreon.com/creativebanter. It's a place where we can interact with you, the listener. And although we greatly appreciate those who contribute by joining a tier, discussions are open to everyone, whether you're a paying member or not. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you around next time.